"She doesn't belong here." The words sliced through the champagne-scented air of the gallery like shattered crystal. The elderly woman in her faded blue dress froze, her weathered hands trembling slightly as every head turned. That's when Keanu Reeves set down his glass. The Grand Wilshire Gallery glittered with New York's elite, diamonds catching light from crystal chandeliers, as waiters in white gloves circulated with champagne. The jewelry exhibition's opening night had drawn collectors, critics, and celebrities, all dressed in designer finery. In the corner, security guards watched the elderly woman with suspicion as she approached the central display case. "I just wanted to see them again," she whispered, her voice lost among laughing socialites. The curator's hand gripped her shoulder, guiding her firmly toward the exit. She glanced back once at the diamond necklace bearing her unacknowledged craftsmanship, 50 years of mastery, dismissed in seconds. The crowd had already forgotten her, returning to their conversations, all except one man who moved quietly through the crowd, following her path to the door. Maria Sokolova had spent 63 years crafting jewelry that adorned royalty, celebrities, and museums. At 87, her fingers still remembered every curve of the Midnight Embrace, the centerpiece of tonight's exhibition. She had created it when she was 30, working 18-hour days for months in a tiny workshop. The diamond and sapphire necklace now rested on a velvet pedestal valued at $12 million, with no mention of her name anywhere. "The invitation says public exhibition," she explained quietly to the curator blocking her path. His name tag read Preston Whitfield III, and his tailored suit probably cost more than her monthly pension. "Public means people who appreciate fine art," Preston replied, voice dripping with condescension. "Not former workshop employees. The artists will be recognized at the formal ceremony." His eyes slid dismissively over her worn shoes and the small canvas bag that held her original sketches. Maria's shoulders slumped as she backed away, dignity intact, but spirit breaking. The guests nearest them pretended not to notice, champagne glasses raised to cover uncomfortable smiles. From across the room, Keanu Reeves observed the interaction, recognition slowly dawning in his eyes. He had worn Maria's creations in 3 films without knowing the hands that made them. Unlike most celebrity attendees who came for publicity, Keanu had a genuine appreciation for craftsmanship. He watched as security guided the elderly woman toward the exit, her dignity maintained despite the public dismissal. "That woman designed half the pieces in this room," whispered an older photographer standing next to Keanu. "Been forgotten by everyone who got rich off her work." Preston, the curator, was now holding court near the central display, gesturing grandly at the Midnight Embrace. His voice carried through the crowd. "This piece represents the pinnacle of American jewelry artistry, commissioned by the Vandermeer family in 1965. Notice the unique setting technique that has become the signature of our sponsoring house." A few feet away, Maria paused at the exit, her hand reaching into her canvas bag to touch the yellowed sketch of the necklace, drawn in her tiny apartment during a blizzard, when inspiration had struck at 3 a.m. She looked back once more, eyes lingering on the creation that had launched her career, but never bore her name. The security guard's hand was firm on Maria's elbow as they reached the grand entrance. Outside, the autumn evening had turned cold, and her thin coat would provide little protection for the long bus ride home. The contrast between the warmth of the gallery and the chill waiting beyond the doors mirrored the cold reality of her legacy, beautiful pieces locked behind glass, her contribution erased. "I understood the technique because my grandmother was a seamstress," she murmured to no one in particular. "The way fabric can hold a shape but still move with the body, that's what makes the Midnight Embrace special. It flows like water when worn." The guard looked at her with a mix of pity and impatience. This wasn't the first time he'd escorted someone who didn't belong. "Ma'am, I need you to leave now," he said, reaching for the door. That's when a voice spoke from behind them. "Excuse me." The simple phrase carried such quiet authority that both Maria and the guard turned simultaneously. Keanu Reeves stood there, champagne glass gone, hands relaxed at his sides. His presence seemed both ordinary and extraordinary at once. The casual stance of a man in a simple black suit contrasted with the unmistakable face known to millions. "I believe there's been a mistake," he said. The security guard's posture immediately changed, straightening as he recognized Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, sir, is there something I can help you with?" "I'd like to speak with this lady," Keanu said, his voice carrying the same gentle authority he brought to his most beloved characters. He turned to Maria, extending his hand. "I'm Keanu." "Maria Sokolova," she replied, her accent stronger with emotion. "I know who you are, Mr. Reeves. My granddaughter loves your movies." The guard hesitated, caught between protocols and celebrity status. "Sir, we've been instructed that this woman isn't on the guest list." Keanu's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened slightly. "She's with me now." The simple statement carried no aggression, yet left no room for argument. He offered his arm to Maria, who took it with a surprised smile. "I believe you have stories about these pieces that I'd like to hear." As they turned back toward the exhibition, Preston the curator was already rushing toward them, alerted by security through his earpiece. His face fluctuated between the plastic smile reserved for celebrities and the frown intended for Maria. Behind him, photographers had noticed Keanu's movement, and several were already raising cameras. "Mr. Reeves, such an honor to have you with us tonight," Preston gushed, strategically positioning himself to block Maria from view. "I'd be delighted to give you a private tour of our most exceptional pieces." Keanu's smile remained warm, but his position didn't change, his arm still linked with Maria's. "Thank you, but I've just met someone with a unique perspective on the collection," he gestured to Maria. Ms. Sokolova was just about to share the story behind The Midnight Embrace. Preston's smile faltered. "While we appreciate Ms. Sokolova's long-ago contributions to the craft, tonight is about celebrating the current visionaries of the jewelry world. Perhaps another time would be more appropriate for historical perspectives." The dismissal hung in the air, heavy and obvious. Several nearby guests had stopped their conversations, attention drawn to the unusual tension. Phones were discreetly raised, recording the interaction. Maria began to withdraw her arm, the familiar weight of invisibility settling back on her shoulders. "Actually," Keanu said gently, maintaining his connection with Maria, "I find that understanding the history of art deepens appreciation for it." He turned directly to Maria, giving her his full attention. "You mentioned your grandmother was a seamstress. How did that influence your design?" The simple question, asked with genuine interest, straightened Maria's spine. For the first time that evening, someone was seeing her, not as an intruder, but as an artist. Nearby, a woman in diamonds worth millions leaned closer. Curiosity piqued. In that moment, the power in the room shifted imperceptibly but decisively. Maria reached into her canvas bag and carefully extracted a yellowed sketchbook. "My grandmother worked for a Russian ballet company, creating costumes that looked like stone but moved like water. When I designed this," she opened to a detailed drawing of The Midnight Embrace, "I wanted diamonds to dance." By now, a small crowd had gathered. A famous fashion designer peered over her glasses at the original sketches. "These mechanical drawings are extraordinary," she murmured. "The engineering behind the movement." Preston cleared his throat loudly. "While these anecdotes are charming, we should return to the official program. The current head designer will be speaking shortly about the collection's modern evolution." Keanu, still examining the sketchbook with genuine interest, looked up. "You designed these joints specifically to mimic fabric movement?" he asked Maria, completely ignoring Preston's interruption. Yes, Maria's eyes lit up. Traditional settings are rigid, but I created a micro-hinge system. Each diamond moves independently, yet retains the overall shape. Her weathered finger traced the technical drawings with precision. This required new tools I had to invent myself. Phones were recording more openly now, capturing the elderly woman's animation as she explained complex techniques to an attentive Keanu Reeves. The curator's face had reddened, his exclusive event hijacked by the very person he'd tried to remove. "Perhaps," said a voice from the gathered crowd, "we should hear from the actual creator before the corporate presentation?" The suggestion came from a renowned art critic, her question directed not at Preston, but at Keanu and Maria. Preston stepped forward, voice tight with barely controlled panic. "This is highly irregular. We have a schedule, sponsors, press releases prepared." "I'd like to hear her speak," Keanu said simply. His words carried no aggression, yet their effect rippled through the crowd. Several guests nodded in agreement, curiosity piqued by this unexpected turn of events. The gallery owner, sensing the shifting mood of her prestigious guests, approached swiftly. "Preston, perhaps we can accommodate a small adjustment to the program." Though phrased as a question, her tone made clear it wasn't one. Ms. Sokolova's insights would add a unique historical perspective. Preston's smile tightened to a grimace. "Of course, Miranda. Whatever you think best." He stepped back, defeat evident in every line of his body. Miranda turned to Maria. "Would you be willing to share your story with our guests, perhaps near your creation?" Maria looked to Keanu, who nodded encouragingly. "I would be honored," she said, her accent thickening with emotion. As Keanu guided her toward the central display where the midnight embrace rested on its pedestal, whispers followed them. Phones captured the moment as the elderly woman in her simple dress approached the $12 million creation, escorted by Hollywood royalty. The contrast was striking. Maria's faded blue dress against the black velvet display, her weathered hands gesturing toward diamonds that had once passed through those same fingers. The crowd gathered, champagne forgotten, as Maria stood before her creation. Keanu remained beside her, a quiet presence offering silent support. Gallery lights caught the diamonds, sending prisms across Maria's face as she began to speak. "In 1965, I was a young immigrant with 2 children and a small workshop in Queens," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "When the commission came for the Midnight Embrace, I had no reputation, just ideas that traditional jewelers rejected as impossible." She pointed to specific elements of the necklace, describing nights spent developing new techniques, failures that led to innovations, and the moment when she first saw her completed work draped against human skin. Her technical explanations were interspersed with deeply human stories, her daughter bringing soup to the workshop at midnight, pawning her wedding ring to buy specialized tools, crying with joy when the final piece moved exactly as she had envisioned. "The diamonds are not the treasure," she said, eyes bright with emotion. "It is the knowledge, passed from one generation to another, transformed by each pair of hands." She glanced at her own hands, worn by decades of precision work. "These were once as smooth as yours," she said with a small smile to a young woman in the front. "But I would not trade the marks of my craft for anything." Throughout her impromptu presentation, Keanu watched the crowd's reaction. Renowned collectors who moments ago had dismissed Maria were now captivated by her expertise. Phones recorded every word, but many had lowered their devices, too engrossed to worry about social media. When Maria finished speaking, a moment of silence hung in the air, the kind of quiet that follows something genuine in a world of performance. Then applause began, started by Keanu and quickly spreading throughout the gallery. Several guests wiped tears, moved by her passion and the injustice of her erasure from her own creation's history. A prominent museum director stepped forward. "Ms. Sokolova, Would you be willing to consult on an upcoming exhibition of jewelry techniques? Your knowledge is irreplaceable." Before Maria could answer, the fashion designer who had admired her sketches added, "I'd like to discuss commissioning a small collection inspired by your movement techniques, with your name prominently featured, of course." Preston watched from the periphery, his carefully orchestrated evening transformed into something entirely different. The corporate sponsors he'd been so concerned about pleasing were now lining up to speak with Maria, drawn to authenticity that no marketing budget could manufacture. Miranda, the gallery owner, approached with a glass of water for Maria. "I believe we owe you an apology," she said quietly, "and perhaps a proper exhibition of your work and methods. Would you be interested in discussing that possibility?" Maria accepted the water with a trembling hand. "I never wanted fame," she said. "I only wanted to be remembered as part of the story of what I created." Keanu, who had remained silently supportive throughout, finally spoke. "Sometimes the story needs correction," he said, his voice carrying just far enough for those nearby to hear. "Tonight, you've reclaimed your chapter." As the formal portion of the evening resumed, Maria found herself surrounded by people eager to learn more about her techniques. The corporate presentation had been hastily restructured to acknowledge the rediscovered historical contribution of master craftsman Maria Sokolova, with the current designer graciously sharing the spotlight. Keanu had stepped back, allowing Maria her moment, but remained nearby. He watched as she opened her sketchbook for a small group of fascinated apprentice jewelers, their expressions reverent as she explained principles developed over decades of patient work. "I can't thank you enough," Maria said when he rejoined her later, as the crowd began to disperse. "Not just for stopping them from removing me, but for actually listening." Keanu shook his head slightly. "I only created space for what was already true. They needed to see you, the real artist behind the display." Preston approached them, humility now replacing his earlier condescension. "Ms. Sokolova, we would be honored if you would return tomorrow to record a proper interview for our exhibition archives. Your insights would add tremendous value to our historical documentation." Outside the gallery, the autumn night had grown colder, but Maria no longer needed to worry about the long bus ride home. A renowned collector had insisted on sending his driver, after extracting a promise that she would visit his private collection to authenticate several pieces suspected to be her early work. "Will you be all right from here?" Keanu asked as the car arrived. Maria nodded, clutching her sketchbook, no longer just a memory album, but once again a valued professional document. "More than all right. I feel like I've come home after a very long journey." "Your granddaughter," Keanu said with a small smile, "the one who likes my films. Tell her I said hello." "She won't believe me," Maria laughed, a sound of pure joy that made her seem decades younger. "But tonight has taught me that sometimes unbelievable stories are the truest ones." As Keanu watched the car pull away, a young jewelry apprentice approached him, voice hushed with emotion. "Thank you for what you did. I've studied Ms. Sokolova's techniques for years, never knowing she was still alive. You've changed how our entire industry will remember its history." By morning, videos of the encounter had spread across social media. "Keanu Reeves helps forgotten jewelry master reclaim her legacy" became the headline on arts platforms and news sites alike. Clips of Maria explaining her techniques went viral among design communities, with established jewelry houses suddenly acknowledging her influence on their current methods. 3 months later, the Grand Wilshire Gallery unveiled a new exhibition. The hands behind the brilliance, Maria Sokolova's revolutionary jewelry techniques. Her original sketches, tools, and creations were displayed alongside videos of her working. The Midnight Embrace now bore a plaque with her name prominently featured, honoring the woman who had transformed how diamonds could move against skin. On opening night, Maria arrived not in a faded blue dress, but in an elegant ensemble created specifically for her by the fashion designer she'd met that fateful evening. She moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, no longer invisible, but celebrated as a master of her craft. Keanu declined interview requests about the incident, simply stating, "Art endures when we honor those who create it." But he sent Maria a small note that she kept in her workshop. True value isn't in what we possess, but in what we create and share. Thank you for reminding the world of that. In jewelry schools across the country, students now study the Sokolova method of setting stones for movement. And in her small apartment, Maria added a new page to her sketchbook, a drawing of hands passing knowledge from one generation to the next, with the simple caption, "The most precious things cannot be locked behind glass."